The Velith Council chamber was designed to make visitors feel small curved. Walls rose 10 meters high and glowed with the combined bioluminescence of 100 ancient crystals. 12. Counselors sat in an elevated semicircle, their lights blazing, with various colors that shifted as they observed the proceedings. Tazek stood alone in the center of the floor and felt like an insect under a magnifying glass. Counselor Van spoke first, with satisfaction dripping from every word. This human has no place among our people. He carries violence in his blood and trauma in his mind. Allowing him access to our children is an invitation to disaster. Tazek listened without responding. He had agreed to let Van present his case fully before speaking in his own defense. It was the Velith way, and he needed to show respect for their customs, even as those customs were being used against him. The records are clear. Van continued. Sergeant Yun Tazek killed 17 enemy combatants during the First Contact War. He witnessed the deaths of his entire squad and survived only through blind luck. Human psychological reports confirm he suffers from severe emotional damage. He turned to address the full council. Is this the kind of being we want influencing our children? A broken killer from a species that has not even mastered its own violent impulses? The council members shifted in their seats, and their lights flickered with uncertain color. Stasek could feel the momentum moving against him. Then Councilor Janae stood from her position on the council. May the human speak in his own defense, she asked formally. The lead counselor, an ancient Velith with light that had faded to soft silver, nodded his permission. Tazek stepped forward and took a deep breath. Everything Counselor Van has said about my past is true. He began. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. I was a soldier. I killed in battle. I watched my friends die. I spent 3 years afterward hiding from life because I believed I deserved to suffer. He paused and looked around the chamber at faces that radiated contempt and suspicion. I came to this station broken and empty. I worked in the cargo bays because I wanted to disappear. I avoided connections because I was afraid of hurting anyone else. I was waiting to die without having the courage to actually end things. His voice grew stronger. Then a young girl with dim light and endless curiosity asked me a question I could not answer. She looked at me and saw something I had forgotten existed. She told me my light wanted to be bright again. He turned to face Van directly. You call me a killer. You are right. I have taken lives and I will carry that weight forever. But you make it sound like violence is all humans know. You ignore everything else we are capable of. He swept his gaze across the council. Humans are flawed. We fight and hurt each other and make terrible mistakes. But we also love fiercely and forgive generously and heal from wounds that should destroy us. We fall down and we get back up. We lose everything and we rebuild from nothing. His voice rose with passion. Your daughter taught me this. A child who's been rejected by her own people for something she cannot control. She reached out to a stranger from another species and offered kindness with no expectation of return. She saw my pain, and instead of judging me, she asked what she could do to help. He pointed at Van. You asked what humans contribute to Velith society. I will tell you, we contribute hope. We contribute the belief that tomorrow can be better than today. We contribute the stubborn refusal to accept that broken things must stay broken forever. He lowered his hand. Sari has changed me in ways I cannot fully express. She made me want to live again. She made me believe I could still do good in this universe. If that is contamination, then I am guilty. He stood tall and met the lead counselor's ancient eyes. But I do not think it is contamination. I think it is connection. I think it is the beginning of something neither of our species could achieve. Alone, silence filled the chamber. Then Counselor Janae spoke again. I opposed human Velith cooperation for many years. She admitted, I considered humans primitive and dangerous. Then I watched this man interact with my daughter. She stepped down from her seat and walked to stand beside Tazek. He treated her with kindness and respect. He answered her questions with patience. He never once made her feel defective or lesser. He saw a curious child who wanted to learn, and he taught her with love. Her light shifted to warm golden colors. My daughter's condition is incurable. I was told she would fade slowly until her light went out completely. But since she began studying with this human, her light has stabilized. The doctors believe emotional well-being has strengthened her somehow. She turned to face the council. A human's friendship may have saved my daughter's life, if that is not worth protecting, then I do not know what our culture stands for anymore. Van started to object, but the lead counselor raised a hand for silence. We have heard both arguments. The ancient Velith said, "We will now vote on whether to continue the cultural exchange program and Tysik's role as liaison." The vote proceeded quickly. 8 counselors voted in favor of continuing. 4 voted against, including Vanth, lead counselor. Announced the result with gravity. The program will continue. Counselor Vaughn's complaint is dismissed. Furthermore, Van is formally censured for conducting unauthorized investigations and attempting to intimidate the human. Liaison Vaughn's light blazed with fury, but he could not defy the council's ruling. He swept out of the chamber without another word. Tasik felt his legs grow weak with relief. Janae touched his shoulder gently. "You spoke well. Perhaps better than any human has ever spoken before our council." "I spoke the truth," Tysic replied. "Your daughter deserved nothing less." 6 months later, Tysic walked through the promenade of Orbital Station Threshold 7. He no longer avoided crowds or kept his eyes down. He greeted neighbors and stopped to chat with shop owners and smiled at children of every species who ran past on their way to important adventures. The lower cargo bays seemed like a distant memory. He now lived in modest quarters in the diplomatic quarter and worked full-time as the first official human Velith cultural ambassador. His photograph hung in the station's hall of achievement next to diplomats and scientists and heroes of every species. More importantly, his squad mate's photograph hung on his wall where he could see it every morning. He had finally contacted their families and shared memories of their loved ones. The pain of their loss would never fully disappear, but it no longer crushed him. He carried them with him as inspiration rather than guilt. Tysic. A familiar voice called. He turned to see Sari running toward him through the crowd. Her bioluminescence had grown noticeably stronger in recent months. New treatments developed through human Velith medical cooperation had stabilized her condition, and some doctors believed she might eventually shine as brightly as any of her people. She reached him and took his hand in the way she had made entirely her own. "Half human and half Velith. Mother says the first exchange students arrive tomorrow," she said excitedly. "Human children coming to learn from us and Velith children going to learn from them. A new chapter." Tysic agreed. Sari looked up at him with those large dark eyes that had once seen straight through his walls. "Your light is very bright now," she said. The words echoed the first thing she had ever said to him, but transformed into something wonderful. Tysic smiled and squeezed her hand gently. "You gave me the spark," he said. "Everything else grew from that one gentle line you spoke." To a stranger in a storage room, Sari smiled back in that slightly awkward human way she had perfected over months of practice. "Maybe that is what humans and Velith can give each other," she said. "Sparks to light each other's darkness." They walked together into the station's artificial sunlight. A former soldier and the child who had saved him with nothing more than kindness and curiosity behind them. The galaxy stretched infinite and cold, but in this small corner of the universe, 2 species had begun building something warm, and it had all started with one gentle line, spoken by a girl who believed that dim light could become bright again. 2 months into his new role as cultural liaison, Tysic had transformed the small room assigned to him in the Velith embassy into something wonderful. He had brought in images of Earth's mountains and oceans and cities. He had acquired samples of human music that played softly from a small speaker. He had even convinced the embassy kitchens to prepare simple human foods that Sari could try during their lessons. The girl devoured knowledge like a starving person discovering food for the first time. Today, they sat together while Taisik explained the human concept of pets. So you keep animals in your homes, Sari said with her light flickering in confusion. But you do not eat them? Correct. We keep them as companions, we love them and care for them, and they give us affection in return. That seems very strange. Many human customs seem strange at first, Taisik admitted, but there is usually a reason behind them. Pets teach us about unconditional love and responsibility. They help us feel less alone. Sari considered this with her usual seriousness. I think I would like a pet, she said. Something small and warm that would not care about my dim light. Animals do not judge like people do. Taisik agreed. They love you for who you are, not for what you look like. Sari's faint glow pulsed with golden warmth. Humans are like that too, she said. You never look at me with pity or disgust. You look at me like I am normal. You are normal. Sari, you just glow a little differently than others. That does not make you less valuable. The girl reached out and took his hand in the way. She had learned from human customs her skin was cool and slightly damp like touching morning dew. But the gesture was unmistakably affectionate. You glow differently too, she said. When I first met you, your light was so dim I could barely see it. Now it is brighter every day. Sometimes I think we are healing each other. Taisik felt his throat tighten with emotion. He squeezed her hand gently. I think you might be right. The door to the learning room burst open with violent force. A tall, Velith male strode in with robes of deep purple and a light blazing with furious reds and oranges. Behind him followed three other Velith, whose expressions radiated contempt. So, this is where the contamination occurs, the male said. A human corrupting one of our children with primitive customs. Sari shrank back in her chair, and her dim light flickered with Taisik stood and placed himself between the girl and the intruders. Who are you? He demanded. I am Counselor Van, the male replied, and I represent those who believe humanity has no place in Velith affairs. He swept his gaze around the room, taking in the images of Earth and a human music player and the remnants of human food. This is disgusting, he declared. You have turned a sacred learning space into a monument to human barbarity. I have done nothing wrong, Taisik said. I have permission from Counselor Jine to teach her daughter about human culture. Jine has allowed her personal feelings to cloud her judgment. Van sneered. She always was weak when it came to that defective child. Sari made a small sound of pain, and her light dimmed even further. Taisik felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Leave now, he said quietly. You are frightening the girl. Van laughed without humor. Do you know what this human was before he came here? He asked his companions loudly. He was a soldier, a killer, a man who dealt death for his primitive government. He turned back to Taisik, with triumph blazing in his eyes. I had you investigated. Sergeant Yan Taisik of the Republic Marines. You served in the First Contact War. You killed 17 Kethrani soldiers in close combat before your squad was massacred on a planet called XR7. Each word hit Taisik like a physical blow. The memories rushed back with terrible clarity. Fire and blood and screaming, and the faces of 7 people he had failed to protect. Your own records show you suffer from what humans call survivor guilt and post-traumatic stress. Van continued. You are broken, dangerous, unstable. And Counselor Jine has allowed you access to a Velith child. He stepped closer until his blazing light nearly touched Taisik's face. What happens when your primitive human mind breaks completely? What happens when you decide to kill again? Will Sari be your next victim? I would never hurt her, Taisik said, but his voice cracked with the weight of his resurfacing trauma. You already hurt everyone you touch, Van replied. Your entire squad died while you survived. Every person who gets close to you ends up destroyed. You are a curse. Wearing human skin, Sari stood from her chair with her dim light flickering wildly. "Stop it," she cried. "Stop hurting him." But Van ignored her. "I am filing a formal complaint with the council," he announced. "By tomorrow this arrangement will be ended, and this human will be banned from the diplomatic quarter permanently." He turned and swept out of the room with his followers behind him. The door closed and silence filled the space station. Stood frozen with his heart pounding and his hands shaking, and every dark thought he had suppressed for months screaming in his head was right. He was broken and dangerous, and everyone who got close to him ended up hurt. He should never have accepted this position. He should never have let himself care about Sari. He should run before he destroyed another person who made the mistake of trusting him. "Tysic," Sari said softly, "please look at me." But he could not look at her. He could not face the concern in her eyes or the affection in her voice, because he did not deserve any of it. "I have to go," he said. He walked out of the room and through the embassy corridors and down through the station's levels until he reached his tiny quarters in the lower rings. Sat on his bed and stared at the wall and felt 3 years of careful healing crumble into dust. The darkness welcomed him back like an old friend. He pulled out his tablet and opened a message to Counselor Ginny. His fingers typed words of resignation and apology. He was leaving the station. He could not risk hurting Sari any further. He was sorry for everything. His finger hovered over the send button. A knock came at his door. He ignored it, but the knock came again, more insistently. "Go away." He called. The door opened anyway, because locks meant nothing to a determined Velith girl who had learned to hack human security systems weeks ago. Sari stepped into his quarters, and her dim light flickered with colors he had never seen before. She was crying in the Velith way, her bioluminescence fading to almost nothing as her emotions overwhelmed her. "Are you leaving because of me?" she asked. "Did I do something wrong? Did my friendship make your light dimmer instead of brighter?" The question shattered something inside. Tysic looked at this small alien girl standing in his doorway, with tears of light streaming from her skin and fear written across her features. She thought this was her fault. She thought his pain was because of her. He deleted the resignation message and dropped his tablet on the bed. "No," he said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. You are the only thing I have done right in 3 years." Sari ran to him and wrapped her thin arms around his chest in a human hug she had practiced dozens of times, her cool skin and faint light pressed against him, and Tysic held her gently while she cried. "Please do not leave," she whispered. "Please do not let the angry man win." Tysic thought about his squadmates and how they had fought until the very end. He thought about how disappointed they would be if they could see him running from this battle. He thought about how Do-Hyun would tell him to stop being an idiot and fight for the things that mattered. "I am not going anywhere," he said, "but I need to face the council and answer for my past honestly." Sari looked up at him with hope blooming in her dark eyes. "You will fight?" "I will fight," he confirmed. "For you, for your mother, for every human and Velith who believes. We can build something better together." He was terrified, but he was done running. Tomorrow, he would face his accusers and speak his truth. Whatever happened after, that was in the hands of fate. 3 months had passed since Sari first took to Tysic in the embassy storage room. What began as stolen moments between deliveries had grown into something neither of them expected. The girl waited for him every time he arrived, and they talked until her tutors came searching for her. Tysic found himself looking forward to these conversations in a way he had not looked forward to anything in years. Sari wanted to know everything about humans. She asked about Earth and its blue oceans and green forests and crowded cities. She asked about human families and how parents raise their children. She asked about human art and music and the strange way humans danced by moving their bodies to rhythmic sounds. Tysic answered every question as best he could and discovered that explaining humanity to an alien helped him appreciate things he had taken for granted. "Tell me about human food," Sari said one afternoon as they sat in a quiet corner of the embassy gardens. "We made different things," Taisik explained. "Plants and animals and things made from plants and animals. We have thousands of recipes from different cultures. Do you eat together?" "Often." "Yes. Sharing a meal is a way of building friendship and showing love." Sari's dim light flickered with interest. "My people eat alone," she said. "We consider it private, like sleeping or bathing. The idea of eating with others seems very intimate." "I suppose it is intimate." Taisik agreed. "There is trust involved when you share food with someone. Would you share food with me?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at this small alien girl with her faint glow and her curious eyes, and he felt something shift inside his chest. "I would like that," he said. Sari's light pulsed with warm golden colors, and she smiled in the way she had learned from watching humans. Her smile was slightly wrong with lips pulled at odd angles, but the intention behind it was pure. Taisik smiled back, and for a moment, the universe felt smaller and warmer and less lonely. The sound of sharp footsteps broke the moment. Counselor Jine swept into the garden with her silver robes flowing and her light blazing with complicated colors. "Sari, your tutors are looking for you again," she said, but she did not immediately order her daughter away. Instead, she stood watching Taisik with an expression he could not read. "Human," she said formally. "I would speak with you privately, Sari, please. Return to your lessons." Sari looked between her mother and Taisik with obvious worry. He did nothing wrong. "Mother, I know. Go now." Sari touched Taisik's hand briefly before leaving, a gesture so human it made his heart ache. Counselor Jine waited until her daughter disappeared before speaking. "You know my daughter is different." She said it was not a question. "I know her light is dimmer than other Velith." Taisik replied carefully. Jine's expression tightened with pain she could not entirely hide. "She has a degenerative condition that affects her bioluminescence. Among my people, this makes her an outcast. Children refuse to play with her, and adults look at her with pity or disgust. She has no friends." Taisik felt anger rise in his chest. "That is cruel." "It is our way," Jine said. "The light represents health and vitality and spiritual wholeness. A dim light suggests weakness or corruption. I do not agree with these beliefs. But I cannot change 10,000 years of culture." She paused, and her blazing light dimmed slightly. "Since she began speaking with you, my daughter has been happier than I have seen her in years. She talks about you constantly. She asks questions about humans at every meal. She has begun smiling in that strange human way." Taisik did not know what to say. "I have watched you from a distance." Jine continued. "You carry great pain inside you, but you are gentle with my child. You answer her questions with patience, and you treat her like she matters." "She does matter." The words came out fierce and sudden, and Taisik surprised himself. With their intensity, Jane studied him for a long moment. "I have a request," she said. "It is unprecedented, and many of my colleagues will oppose it, but I believe it may benefit both my daughter and the future of human-Velith relations." "What request?" "I would like you to serve as a cultural liaison for Sari's education. You would teach her about humanity in a formal capacity. You would be compensated appropriately and granted access to the diplomatic quarter whenever needed." Taisik felt the ground shift beneath his feet. For 3 years, he had avoided responsibility and connection and anything that might give him a reason to care. Now, Velith counselor was asking him to become officially responsible for her daughter's education. "Why me?" he asked. "I am just a cargo worker. You are a former soldier who survived terrible trauma." Jine replied, "You understand suffering, and you have chosen to keep living despite your pain. My daughter needs to see that dimness is not permanent. That light can return after darkness." She stepped closer, and her voice softened. "You have already begun teaching her this lesson. I am simply asking you to continue." Taisik thought about his tiny quarters in the lower levels and his empty routine, and his nightmares that came less frequently. Now he thought about Sari's curious questions, and her awkward human smile, and the way her dim light pulsed with golden warmth whenever she saw him. He thought about his dead squad mates and how they would feel if they knew he was finally reaching towards something instead of hiding from everything. "Yes," he said. "I will do it." Jine's light shifted with colors that might have indicated relief or gratitude. "You should know there will be opposition," she warned. "Not all Velith welcome human influence. Some will see this arrangement as contamination of our culture. I understand. Do you? There are those who would rather see this station's alliance with humanity ended entirely. They consider your species dangerous and unpredictable. They will not appreciate a human having access to a Velith child." Tysic met her gaze without flinching. "I spent 3 years running from responsibility because I was afraid of failing the people who depended on me. I am done running. Your daughter offered me kindness when I deserved none. The least I can do is return that kindness, even if it makes me enemies." Jine's light flickered with something that almost looked like respect. "Perhaps humans are not as simple as we believed," she said. "Perhaps Velith are not as cold as we believed." Tysic replied for the first time since they met. Counselor Jine smiled. It was a small expression barely visible on her alien features, but it was unmistakably genuine. "Report to the embassy tomorrow morning," she said. "We will discuss the terms of your new position." And Sergeant Yun Tysic, "Thank you for caring about my daughter." She turned and walked away, leaving Tysic alone in the glowing garden. He stood there for a long time, thinking about how strange life could be. Broken soldier and a dimming girl had found each other across the vast distance between stars. Now he had a purpose again. Now he had someone to protect. He did not see the figure watching from the shadows at the edge of the garden. He did not see the hostile light blazing with angry reds. He did not know that someone had already begun planning to tear his new hope apart. The young Velith girl looked up at Tysic with those large dark eyes that seemed to hold the depth of an entire ocean. Her faint bioluminescence flickered with soft colors as she studied him in silence. Then she spoke one gentle line that would echo in his mind for the rest of his life. "Your light is very dim," she said in careful accented English. "But I think it wants to be bright again." Tysic felt the words hit him like a physical blow. His chest tightened and his throat closed, and for a terrible moment he thought he might actually cry in front of this alien child. He had spent 3 years building walls around his pain and burying his guilt. Under endless hours of meaningless labor, a child had seen through all of it in seconds. "I do not understand what you mean," he lied. The girl tilted her head again in that curious bird-like way. "All living things have light inside them," she explained. "My people can see this light and feel what it means. Your light is small and dark, but it pulses like it is trying to grow, like a seed waiting for water." Before Tysic could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Sari, what are you doing here?" A tall Velith woman swept into the storage area, with robes flowing behind her like liquid silver. Her bioluminescence blazed with bright angry reds, and her dark eyes fixed on the child with clear displeasure. "Mother," the girl said without any trace of guilt, "I was speaking with the human. He is very interesting." "You should not speak with workers," the woman said coldly. "Return to your tutors immediately." The girl named Sari looked back at Tysic one more time. Then she did something that made his heart skip. She waved at him. It was a small gesture and slightly awkward, like she had learned it from watching human broadcasts without ever practicing. But it was unmistakably human and unmistakably friendly. Sari walked past her mother and disappeared into the embassy's glowing corridors. The tall Velith woman turned to Tysic with an expression of distaste. "I am Counselor Jine of the Velith diplomatic mission," she said. "I apologize if my daughter disturbed your work. She has a tendency to wander where she should not. She was no trouble." Tysic replied. Counselor Jine studied him for a moment with eyes that held the same penetrating quality as her daughter's. Where she saw in him made Her expression shifted from distaste to something more complicated. You carry heavy burdens. Human, she said. My daughter should not have commented on such personal matters. We consider it rude among adults to speak of another's inner light, but not among children, Tysic said. Children say what they see without understanding the weight of their words. Janae replied, It is their gift and their curse. She turned and walked away without another word, and Tysic was left alone in the storage area surrounded by glowing plants and the lingering echo of a child's simple observation. He finished logging his delivery and returned his hover card to the lower levels. The rest of his shift passed in a blur of routine tasks, but his mind was somewhere else. Entirely, your light is very dim, but I think it wants to be bright again. The words would not leave him alone. That night, Tysic sat on his bed in his tiny quarters and stared at the wall as he always did, but something was different. The silence felt heavier, and the darkness felt deeper, and the emptiness felt less like peace and more like a prison. He reached under his mattress and pulled out a small metal case he had not opened in 3 years. Inside was a photograph printed on actual paper. Because some things were too important for digital storage, 8 soldiers smiled at the camera with arms around each other and dust on their faces and joy in their eyes. Tysic stood in the center with Corporal Do-yoon on his left and Private Minji on his right. They had taken this picture 3 days before the ambush on XR7. 3 days before everything. And Tysic usually looked at this photograph and felt only guilt and shame. He had survived, and they had not, and no amount of therapy or time could change that simple, terrible fact. But tonight he looked at their faces and something different stirred inside him. He remembered how Do-yoon used to sing old songs while cleaning his weapon. He remembered how Minji collected small rocks from every planet they visited. He remembered how Soina always shared her rations with anyone who looked hungry. Remembered them as they had lived, not just how they had died. Tears ran down his face for the first time since the memorial service, and he did not try to stop them. The next morning, Tysic reported for his shift as usual. Grigor looked at his tablet and assigned him to the lower cargo bays where he belonged. Actually, Tysic heard himself say, Is the diplomatic quarter assignment still available? Grigor raised an eyebrow but did not question him. The computer shows an opening for the Velith embassy route. You want it? Yes. The word came out before Tysic could stop it, and he told himself it was because the diplomatic quarter had better lighting and cleaner air. He knew he was lying. He wanted to see the girl again. He wanted to understand how she had looked into his soul and found something worth saving. The Velith embassy needed regular supply deliveries, and Tysic made himself available for every one of them. Days turned into weeks, and he caught glimpses of Sari in the corridors, always watching from a distance, always waving when she saw him. Counselor Jine observed these interactions with visible disapproval, but did not forbid them. The girl's questions came in small pieces between his deliveries. Why do humans shake hands? It started as a way to show we were not holding weapons. Tysic explained, Why do humans smile with their teeth? In my culture, showing teeth is aggressive. For us, it means we are happy or friendly. Why do humans leak water from their eyes? Tysic paused at this question because the answer was more complicated. We call it crying, he said. It happens when our feelings are too big to keep inside. Sari considered this with the serious expression of a child contemplating deep philosophy. That is beautiful, she said. Your species lets your feelings escape so they do not poison you from within. My people keep everything inside, and sometimes I think it makes us cold. Tysic looked at this small alien girl with her faint flickering light and her endless curiosity, and he felt something he had not felt in 3 years. He felt hope. Maybe that is why you talked to me, he said, because you were looking for warmth. Sari's dim light pulsed with soft golden colors he had never seen before. Maybe that is why you let me talk to you, she replied, because you were looking for it too. For the first time in 3 years, Sergeant Yun Taisik smiled and meant it. The cargo crate weighed almost 200 kilograms, but Yun Taisik lifted it like it was nothing more than an empty box. 3 years of hauling freight on orbital station. Threshold 7 had turned his body into a machine built for labor and nothing. Elsie set the crate down in the storage bay and wiped sweat from his forehead before reaching for the next one. Other workers had already left for their meal break, but Taisik preferred to work alone. He always preferred to be alone. The station hummed around him with the sound of 1,000 different systems, keeping everyone alive in the cold emptiness of space. Threshold 7 served as humanity's gateway to the wider galaxy, a massive rotating ring where humans and aliens lived side by side in an uneasy peace. 3 years had passed since the first contact. War ended, and most people had moved on with their lives. Taisik had not moved on. He had simply stopped. The last crate slid into place, and he checked his wrist display to confirm the delivery was complete. His shift had ended 2 hours ago, but overtime meant less time in his quarters, and less time meant fewer dreams. Dreams were always the same: fire and screaming, and the faces of 7 soldiers who had trusted him to keep them alive. He grabbed his jacket and walked through the lower corridors toward his housing block. The lower levels of Threshold 7 were cramped and poorly lit, home to dock workers and maintenance crews and anyone else who could not afford the upper ring. Taisik could afford better quarters. Now, after 3 years of saving almost every credit he earned, he stayed in the lower levels anyway, because the darkness felt appropriate. His room measured 4 meters by 3 meters and contained a bed and a small desk and nothing else. No pictures on the walls and no personal items and no evidence that a human being actually lived there. He sat on the bed and stared at the wall until exhaustion pulled him down into sleep. The dream came, as it always did. Sergeant Yun Taisik led his squad through the rocky canyon on the planet designated XR7, and everything seemed quiet, too quiet. Private Minji had joked, and everyone had laughed because soldiers always laughed at danger. Then the sky turned to fire. The Kathrani ambush killed 3 of his people in the first 10 seconds. Taisik screamed orders, and his squad fought back with everything they had, but the enemy had chosen their ground perfectly. He watched Corporal Doyun take a plasma bolt meant for him. He watched Private Cyan drag herself toward cover with her legs burned away below the knees. He watched them die one by one until he was the only one left standing when the rescue shuttle finally arrived. The medics told him he was lucky. He never felt lucky. Taisik woke with his heart pounding and his sheets soaked with sweat. The station's artificial lighting told him it was morning and time for another shift. He showered and dressed and walked to the cargo bay without eating breakfast. Food was fuel and nothing more. He reported to the shift supervisor and received his assignment for the day. The supervisor, a heavy man named Grigor, frowned at his tablet and then frowned at Taisik. There has been a scheduling error, Grigor said in his thick accent. You are assigned to the diplomatic quarter today. Taisik felt something cold settle in his stomach. I'm not qualified for diplomatic quarter work. The computer says you are qualified, and I do not argue with computers. Grigor replied. Supplies for the Velith Embassy, Bay 7. 1 hour. The Velith were among the oldest species in the known galaxy. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, with thin, graceful bodies and skin that glowed with soft, bioluminescent light. Their eyes were large and dark, and seemed to look through you rather than at you. During the First Contact War, they had remained neutral, watching humans and Kathrani slaughter each other without offering help to either side. Most humans found the Velith cold and arrogant, and Taisik had no reason to disagree. He loaded the supplies onto a hover cart and made his way up through the station's levels. The diplomatic quarter occupied the uppermost ring where the artificial gravity was gentlest and the views of the stars were best. Everything here was clean and bright and beautiful in ways the lower levels could never. But Taisik felt like a stain on white fabric as he pushed his cart through the polished Corridors to Velith Embassy took up an entire section of the ring. Its entrance marked by flowing script in a language humans could not read to Velith. Guards watched him approach with expressions that suggested they had found something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of their shoes. "Cargo delivery," Tyzik said, keeping his voice flat and professional one. Guard gestured for him to enter without speaking. The embassy interior glowed with soft blues and purples from the bioluminescent plants that covered every surface. Tyzik kept his eyes forward and followed the markers to the storage area where he began unloading crates. He worked quickly and efficiently because the sooner he finished, the sooner he could return to the lower levels where he belonged. The sound made him pause. He turned to find a young Velith. Watching him from behind a pillar, she was small by Velith standards, barely taller than Tyzik himself, and her bioluminescence was faint and flickering compared to the adults he had seen. She looked like the equivalent of a 12-year-old human child. Her large, dark eyes studied him with obvious curiosity, and no trace of the contempt her elders had shown. Tyzik returned to his work and tried to ignore her. Children made him uncomfortable. They reminded him of futures that would never happen and families he would never have. "You are a human," the girl said. Her voice was soft and musical like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Yes," Tyzik replied without turning around. "I have never spoken to a human before. Now you have." He finished stacking the last crate and prepared to leave, but the girl moved closer. She tilted her head at an angle that seemed almost bird-like, and her dim light flickered with colors he did not recognize. "Why you carry so much weight?" she asked. Tyzik gestured at the empty hover cart. "I am a cargo worker. Carrying weight is my job. I do not mean the boxes," the girl said. She stepped closer still, and Tyzik found himself unable to move. Her large dark eyes seemed to look past his skin and bones and into something deeper. He had heard that Velith could perceive emotions as patterns of light, but he had never experienced it himself. The girl studied him for a long moment, and Tyzik felt exposed in a way he had not felt in years. He wanted to run, but his legs refused to obey. "I should go," he managed to say. The girl tilted her head again, and her dim light pulsed with soft blue color. She opened her mouth to speak, and Tyzik braced himself for whatever alien judgment was coming. He had faced enemy soldiers and watched friends die, but somehow this small glowing child terrified him more than any of that. She was about to say something that would change everything. He could feel it in his bones like the moment before a storm breaks. The girl took one more step toward him and looked up into his eyes with an expression that held no contempt and no pity and no judgment, only gentle curiosity and something that might have been compassion. Tyzik waited for the words that would shatter the walls he had spent 3 years building around his broken heart.